Call to order the January 22nd, 2018 Yuma County Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Before we get started, I think I can actually bypass these as we have no one in the audience, so just do away with that. And we'll call the roll.
Scott Mulhern,
Here.
Ron Rice,
Here.
John McKinley,
Here.
Tim Bowers,
Here.
Matias Rosales,
Sit.
Paul White,
Here.
Alicia Geary,
Here.
Jerry Black, Wayne Idy, Danny Bryant.
Here.
Chairman, you do have a
Cursor
Okay, please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our first item is to elect a chairman. Do we have anyone?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I move that we consider Paul White for a second term as chairman.
Second.
Any other nominations? All right. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I can only do it one more year. That's it.
You're good.
I think you can do it 2, 3 years. Next time is elect a vice chairman.
You are, aren't you?
Yeah. I'd entertain a nomination.
Do it again. Says Neil Tucker in here. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a nomination.
Please.
I'd like to nominate Matias Rosales as vice chairman.
I have a nomination. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations.
Train is running well.
Next item, approval of the 2018 regular meeting schedule for the zoning commission.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a copy in our thing? I didn't, my teleprompter is not working.
Yes.
Okay. Motion to accept the calendar and a second. Was there a second?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Our next item is the approval for the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting minutes of November 20th, 2017 and December 18th, 2017.
Chairman,
Yes.
make a motion, we approve the minutes as submitted.
I have a motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
This could be quick.
And our next item, Commission Initiative Number 17-02, approved text amendment of the Yuma County Zoning Ordinance, Section 605, 07, 606, 07, and 609, 07 to address lot coverage requirements for medium-density residential, high-density residential, and recreational vehicle subdivision zoning districts. Staff?
Thank you, Chairman White, members of the commission, Juan Leal Rubio, Senior Planner with the Planning and Zoning Division. And as you mentioned, this is Commission Initiative 1702, and this is a text amendment to Section 605.07, 606.07, and 609.07 of the Yuma County Zoning Ordinance. The current requirement under these sections, it limits the maximum lot coverage to 30% for properties that are served by a septic system. And this here slide shows the proposed text in strike-through format to be deleted. And bold is new text. We will eliminate the reference to the 30%. Same with this slide. A little bit of history. Back in the late 70s, the 30% rule was adopted in the property zone R2 and R3. I'm not really sure why. 1989, it added this same 30% rule for property zone RVS and the MHS. And in 1997, it was removed from the MHS. The recommendation is that the commission approve Commission Initiative number 1702 as presented by staff. That concludes staff's presentation.
Any questions of staff from the commission? Hearing none, turn it over to the public. Public comment? Hearing none, turn it over to the commission for action.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept staff's recommendation and approve Commission Initiative Number 17-02 to amend the Yuma County zoning ordinances, Section 60507, 60607, and 60907 as presented.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. And any discussion of any items from members or planning director?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to explore the process on how commission initiatives, the proper process for commission initiatives to take place. I understand that as a commission, we have the authority to open up a zoning ordinance, take a look at it, suggest modifications to the County Board of Supervisors. But how do we do that practically?
Staff?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Maggie Castro, Planning and Zoning Director. If the commission makes a motion to look into a possible amendment to the zoning ordinance, it's a matter of bringing it up to staff. Staff would do the appropriate research as to whether, what changes are required to the zoning ordinance. Once those changes are drafted, staff would bring them back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for review. Once the commission approves the wording, then that wording is sent to the Board of Supervisors for review and action. Once the board has reviewed it, it would come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission as a request for a commission initiative.
And how would you like us to go about approaching you with an idea that we have we'd like to investigate?
Mr. Chair, it's simply a motion by the Planning and Zoning Commission directing staff to look into a possible amendment to a certain section or certain sections of the zoning ordinance.
How do we get that motion on the agenda?
Just a matter, like I stated, it's a matter of asking staff to place an item on the agenda for the commission to discuss it as a group.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, individual members should ask staff to place it on the agenda, or the chairman should ask staff to place it on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, an individual member can request that the chair place it on the agenda. So, for example, Mr. Bryant could ask the chairman for an item to be brought back for discussion purposes for a possible amendment to the zoning ordinance. And then at the next meeting, staff would place an item on the agenda for a discussion item.
Okay.
And during that process, if the commission's desire for an amendment or a change in the zoning ordinance was not supported by staff, who advises us then? If staff is, for instance, our goals may not always be the same as staff's goals. Does the county attorney advise staff, or does he advise us?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, the staff is advising the Planning and Zoning Commission. But it's a Planning and Zoning Commission that makes motions and decides what direction to take.
So we direct staff to possibly change an ordinance. If staff is opposed to that, they still write what we've suggested, but then they might make their recommendation that they don't agree.
Right, they should be preparing a staff report explaining what their position is and why they believe it's a good direction to take or not. It would be the commission that would decide to move an initiative forward or not, and if so, what initiative to move forward.
And we could always, I'm sure, set a subcommittee aside to work on the wording if the commission, wanted to follow that route. If staff were struggling with what the commission was asking, we could form a group to assist staff in wording what we'd like.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman, hey, and of course, it could go either way. We could suggest a change. They could deny it or accept it. Now, would it come back to the commission for a yes or no or majority, and then present it again, or?
I think what you'd end up with, if it wasn't something that staff was fully on board with, we'd put together a group to write it. It'd be put on the agenda. It'd be voted on whether to initiate the initiative.
And Mr. Chairman, when the staff brings, for instance, in this case, staff brought a initiative they felt should be changed in the zoning ordinance, but it's up to the commission whether or not to even initiate that.
Right.
And also you have the option of changing the language and deciding what is going to be initiated. Doesn't have to be what staff brought you.
Mr. Chairman, so if I were to come to you and say, Mr. Chairman, I believe that we should change the zoning ordinance with an intent to cause this to happen. And then we say, staff, write us some language that would cause this to happen. And even if you didn't agree with it, you would write that language that would cause X, Y to happen. We would decide whether to ask the Board of Supervisors to look at it then by voting for it and sending it up to the board. Is that the process?
You could take that process, but staff's going to give you what wording they believe is appropriate. The commission can always change that wording. And then after they change it, staff will advise you what they think is going to happen with that new wording. But ultimately, it's the commission. The staff is working for the commission, not the other way around. So, but they have their training in planning, and they may have opinions that would recommend to you not to move forward with something. But it's a commission that decides to move forward, or the commission that decides not to move something forward.
I think the question is, if I'm understanding, is how do you make sure the item gets placed on the agenda to be discussed and create that language or whatever needs to be done? At the city level, if let's say one person doesn't agree for it or staff, a council member could go get 3 signatures from the council members and put an item on the agenda. I think that's his question, that if he goes to the staff and says, I would like to make this initiative change, and they don't feel it needs to be done, they won't put it on the agenda.
No,
How do you
Mr.
make
Chair.
sure? Yeah, I think that's what he's asking. How do you make sure if anything that gets asked for gets put in an agenda, and then we review it and say yes or no, let's go forward?
The commission has to make a motion through the chairman to ask staff to place an item on the agenda for discussion. Staff does not on our own
Right.
decide not to put something on the agenda. If the commission makes a motion and that motion passes, then an item can be placed on the agenda for discussion purposes to discuss a possible amendment to the zoning ordinance.
For instance, if I came to the chairman and said, Mr. Chairman, I think we should look and use the planning and zoning ordinances in order to have the Board of Supervisors' decision to be the final decision on an appeal process from our staff. Then you would write language to say the Board of Supervisors would be the ultimate decision for staff.
Mr. Chairman, staff would draft the language, bring it to you for your review and action. Then we would take it to the board for their review and action. The board may choose to make changes to that language that you initially reviewed and approved, and the item would be brought back to you with the revised language for possible, for possible amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Go ahead, yes. I yield
Well,
to
I
you,
ha-
sir.
what I'm getting out of this is that individual members of the commission cannot ask the staff to write an amendment or initiative.
Mr. Chair, it has to be a motion that's voted on by the commission.
By the commission. Okay.
So a motion and a second will get something to be voted on, and the majority would direct staff.
But I couldn't come to staff individually and say, put this on the agenda.
The chairman could, so you,
But I have to go through the chairman.
right. And
So there's really two ways to do it, Mr. Chairman. One is to just get you to place it on the agenda, or two, to have the a majority of the commissioners to ask it to be on the agenda.
I think,
correct.
yeah, okay, that's fine.
And what frequently happens is staff is working on projects, and they actually bring it as an item, asking you to move it forward as a commission initiative, which you could,
How long has it been since the commission has initiated a commission initiative?
On its own?
well, in every case, the commission has initiated commission initiatives.
Without the request of staff?
That's up to the, I don't,
It's been a while.
been a
Mr.
while, but
Chairman,
it's
it's been a while.
but it's
It seems like we brought up, maybe Max brought up years ago about cleaning up some grandfathered properties in the prime ag or something, and staff kind of cleaned those up. That's the only one I recall. Okay,
I will bring some language to you, my friend.
okay. Any other items for discussion? Hearing none, we're adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, did we forget one?
Did we?